The security guard's name was Frank Deluca. He was 43 years old, had worked the garden for 11 years, and had seen everything that a major New York venue sees over the course of a decade. Presidents, championship fights, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Muhammad Ali, and several thousand performers whose names he could no longer recall because the volume of them had long since exceeded his capacity for individual retention. He was good at his job. He was specifically good at the part of his job that involved reading a crowd, understanding who belonged where, who was moving with purpose and who was drifting, who had the kind of credential that required attention, and who was trying to slip through a door they had no right to be near. He did not recognize Janis Joplin. This was not in the context of his specific role at the specific door he was managing on the evening of October 17, 1969, an unreasonable failure. He was working the main public entrance, not the artist entrance. The artist entrance was on the other side of the building, staffed by different personnel, and that was where the people he was supposed to recognize arrived. He was working the door where the ticket holders came in, the ordinary public, the 17,000 people who had purchased seats for the show, who arrived in the ordinary way of concert-goers, in lines, through turnstiles, with tickets in hand. Janis Joplin arrived at his door without a ticket. She had come around the wrong side of the building. This happened sometimes, even to people who knew the garden well. The exterior presented a certain navigational confusion, and she had come from the direction she was coming from, and arrived at the door she arrived at, and was the wrong door. She understood this dimly even as she arrived, but the crowd was moving and she had moved with it, and now she was at the door and Frank Deluca was looking at her. She was not, at that moment, assembled as the public version of herself. She was between the hotel and the stage, in transit, in the specific condition of a performer who has not yet put on the performance. The feather boas were in the dressing room. The full complement of bracelets and rings was not yet on. She was wearing a jacket and jeans and the beaded necklaces she always wore, but which, in the context of a crowd arriving for a concert, read simply as a woman in a jacket and jeans with some beads around her neck. Deluca looked at her and said, "Ticket." She said, "I'm performing tonight." He had heard that before, not often, but before. The garden attracted a certain category of person who presented themselves at various doors with various claims. He had a protocol for it. The protocol was send them to the artist entrance, which was on the other side of the building and which was not his problem. He said, "Artist entrance is around the side." She said, "I know, I came from the wrong direction." He said, "I can't let you through this door without a ticket. Artist entrance is around the side." And she said, "Okay." And she stepped back from the door, and the crowd moved around her, the ordinary flow of 17,000 people with tickets finding their way into the building, and Janis Joplin stood in the line that had formed behind the entrance and waited. She waited for 5 minutes. Nobody noticed. Nobody recognized her. Nobody stopped the flow of the crowd to say, "That's Janis Joplin standing." In the line, nobody needed to say it. The crowd was doing what crowds do, moving toward the thing they had come for, focused on the destination rather than the terrain between here and there, each person in the particular interior state of someone who is about to experience something they have been anticipating. She stood in the line. She looked at the crowd. And something happened in those 5 minutes that she would not talk about for a long time afterward, that she would mention only once, in a late-night conversation with a journalist several months later that was off the record at her request, that the journalist would not print until years after she was gone. What she saw, standing in the crowd outside Madison Square Garden on a Thursday evening in October 1969, waiting to get into her own show, was the audience. Not the audience as abstraction, not the audience as the receiving end of the performance, not the audience as the crowd that had been there on previous nights and would be there on subsequent nights. The specific people, the specific faces of 17,000 specific human beings who had each arrived at this particular evening through a particular combination of decision and circumstance and desire, who were here because something about what she did had reached them somewhere and they had decided to come. She had been performing for audiences for years. She had stood on stages and looked at crowds and felt the particular electricity of the relationship between the performer and the audience, the current that ran between what she was giving and what they were receiving. She had felt that relationship from the stage, which is the perspective the performer almost always has, looking out from the Elevated position, the lights creating the specific separation between the lit and the dark, the performer visible and the audience a collective presence felt rather than individually seen. She had never stood inside it. She had never been one of them. To understand what those 5 minutes gave her, it helps to understand what 2 years of increasing fame had done to her relationship with the audiences that were the point of all of it. Since Monterey, since the June 1967 afternoon when everything had changed, the audiences had grown. Not just in number, though the numbers had grown significantly and continued to grow. They had grown in intensity, in the quality of attention they brought, in the specific hunger of the wanting. The early audiences in small San Francisco rooms had been real and responsive and had given her something genuine, but they had been the audiences of a performer not yet fully known, audiences that arrived with curiosity rather than with the preformed certainty of people who already knew what they were going to receive. The post-Monterey audiences were different. They arrived knowing. They arrived with the specific expectation of the thing that Monterey had proved was possible, the performance that exceeded what performance was supposed to be able to do, the voice that reached somewhere in the chest that other voices could not reach. They arrived with that expectation, and she was required to meet it, night after night, in venues that kept getting larger, with the particular weight of the known quantity pressing against the performance before the performance had even begun. This was not a complaint. She understood the weight as part of the work, understood that the expectation was itself form of devotion, understood that the audiences who arrived knowing were, in a real sense, the audiences that the work had earned. The performances she gave to those audiences were extraordinary by any measure. She knew this not from the reviews but from the things she felt in the performances themselves, the specific quality of connection that told her from the stage that the current was running. But she had been feeling, in the months before October 1969, a particular form of distance. Not from the music, not from the performance, from the people she was performing for. The stage was the separation that made the connection possible. She had understood this for a long time. The elevation, the lights, the specific architectural relationship between the performer and the audience that the concert venue enforced. These were the conditions under which the transmission happened. You could not do what she did at a party, in a conversation, in the ordinary proximity of everyday life. You needed the stage, you needed the distance. The distance was part of the mechanics, but distance, even necessary distance, accumulates. 2 years of standing on stages and looking out at crowds and feeling the current run and walking off stage and re-entering the ordinary world, 2 years of that specific rhythm had given her something she had not expected and was not sure what to do with. She knew the feeling the audiences had. She could feel it from the stage. She could not reach it from the stage. It was 30 rows away in the dark, and the 30 rows in the dark were the conditions of its arrival. She was performing for people she could not touch. This was not a new understanding. She had articulated something like it before to journalists, to friends, to herself in the private accounting she did during the long hours between performances. She had said, in a Houston hotel room to a journalist who had written it down, something about being lonely everywhere except on the stage. She had meant it precisely and completely when she said it, and she meant it still. But that articulation had been made from the stage's perspective, from the position of the performer who gives and watches the receiving from a distance and understands that the distance is structural rather than personal. What she had never had was the reverse angle, the view from inside the crowd looking toward the stage. She had never been able to see what she looked like from out there. Not in the literal sense. There were photographs and film footage. She had seen what the performances looked like from the outside. In the other sense, she had never understood from the inside of the experience what it felt like to be one of the people in the dark, waiting for the thing to begin. She was in the line. Nobody was watching her. Nobody was expecting anything from her. Nobody had recognized her and turned to her with the specific quality of attention that recognition produces, the attention that immediately reorganizes the space between two people and makes the ordinary impossible. She was just a woman in a jacket in a line, and from that position, the only position she had never occupied relative to her audiences, she could see them. The line moved slowly. The October evening in New York was cold and slightly windy, the particular urban cold that comes off the streets rather than from the sky, that exists as a product of the density of the city rather than the season alone. People in the line were wearing jackets, talking to each other or not. in the anticipatory state of people waiting for something they have decided is worth waiting for. The woman beside her in the line was in her early 20s, wearing a coat with a pin on the lapel that Janis did not look at closely enough to read. She was talking to the man beside her about something, the show, maybe, or something else entirely. The conversation of two people who are in a line together and have decided to be in it together rather than separately. The man on the other side of her was older, 50s maybe, in a suit jacket that read like a concession to the occasion rather than his ordinary attire, as if he had dressed up slightly for something he was not sure required dressing up, and had landed somewhere between his everyday self and the event version. He was alone, or appeared to be, looking toward the door with the patient expression of someone who has been waiting for a long time and is good at it. There was a teenager 3 people ahead of her. She could see only the back of his head and the specific posture of a teenager in a public place, the studied casualness that is itself a kind of intensity. He had dark hair and was wearing a denim jacket and was moving with the line in the slightly unconscious way of someone whose attention is somewhere other than his body. She looked at these people. She looked at the people behind her, the people coming from the street and joining the line, the people who had been here earlier and were already through the door, the continuous stream of arrivals that was the ordinary arrival of an audience at a large concert venue. She looked at the particular quality of how they moved, the mix of anticipation and patience that characterized a line of people waiting for something they have chosen to wait for. People checked their watches. People talked or didn't talk. People shifted their weight from foot to foot in the cold and pulled their jackets tighter and looked toward the door and looked away and looked back. All of it completely ordinary. All of it the ordinary human texture of waiting for something. She thought they came. It was not a complicated thought. It was, in fact, one of the simplest thoughts she had had in a long time, stripped of the apparatus of performance and expectation and the professional machinery of her career, stripped even of the specific emotional register of the performer who knows the audience is there and responds to their presence. It was simply the observation, made from inside rather than from above, that these people had decided to come. They had bought tickets. They had made arrangements. The man in the suit jacket had dressed up slightly, which meant he had thought about it beforehand, had stood in front of his closet and considered and decided. The woman with the pin on her lapel had come with the man beside her, which meant coordination, agreement, the small logistics of getting 2 people to the same place at the same time. The teenager in the denim jacket had been here early enough to be near the front of the line, which meant he had either arrived early by design or had been standing here for a while. They had done all of this to come to a room where she was going to stand on a stage and sing. The thought arrived without drama, without the particular emotional intensity that the performances produced, without the chest-level quality of the current running between the stage and the crowd. It arrived quietly, in the way that the most important things sometimes arrive, as a simple observation, seen clearly because the conditions for clarity were present in a way they rarely were. She was in the line. Nobody was watching her. Nobody was expecting anything from her. Nobody had recognized her and turned to her with the specific quality of attention that recognition produces, the attention that immediately reorganizes the space between 2 people and makes the ordinary impossible. She was just a woman in a jacket in a line, and from that position, the only position she had never occupied relative to her audiences, she could see them. A man from the venue's management team found her in the line after approximately 5 minutes. He had been doing a last walk of the exterior standard procedure before a show, checking the entry points, making sure the crowd flow was manageable, and he had seen her in the line, and his face had gone through a specific sequence of expressions that she would remember afterward as one of the funnier things she had witnessed in recent months. Confusion, recognition, alarm, and the particular professional composure of someone who is recalibrating in real time. He said her name. She said, "Hi." He said, "You're in the line." She said, "I know." He said, "Come on, I'll take you around." She could have said, "Give me another minute." She thought about saying it, but the line was moving and the show was in an hour and there were things that needed to happen before an hour, and so she said, "Okay." She followed him around the building to the artist entrance, which was the entrance she should have come to in the first place, where Frank Deluca was not working and where she was expected and where everything was arranged for her arrival. She went in. She got into the costume. She got into the feather boas and the bracelets and the rings and the southern comfort and the specific assembled version of herself that walked out under the lights and became, for 2.5 hours, the thing that 17,000 people had come to see. The show was extraordinary as her shows were. The current ran. The audience received what she gave and gave back what audiences give back, and the specific relationship between the performer and the crowd was exactly what it was supposed to be: electric, mutual, real. She walked off stage afterward into the narrow backstage corridor, the feathers trailing, the makeup beginning to soften in the heat of the performance. She thought about the man in the suit jacket, about the woman with the pin on the lapel, about the teenager in the denim jacket who had arrived early. She thought they came. And the thought had a different weight now, carried from the line through the show and out the other side, having passed through the performance that she had given to the same people she had been standing among an hour earlier. The connection that ran from the stage to the crowd and back again was not abstract anymore, was not the collective energy of 17,000 people compressed into a single atmospheric presence. It had specific faces in it now, specific histories: the man who had dressed up, the woman who had come with someone, the teenager who had arrived early because it mattered that much. She had been one of them for 5 minutes. She had stood in the line and been a person in the crowd waiting to receive something, and then she had gone around the building and become the something being received. Both things were true at the same time. She was the woman in the jacket in the line, and she was the voice on the stage, and the 5 minutes in the line had not diminished what happened on the stage, but had given it something it could not have had without those 5 minutes: a specific gravity. A weight that came from knowing, from the inside, what the people in the dark were carrying when they came. Frank Deluca finished his shift at midnight. He had worked the main entrance through the entire show, managing the crowd flow, doing his job with the steady competence of 11 years. He had not given the woman without a ticket any further thought. She had been redirected to the proper entrance. The situation had been resolved in the ordinary way, and the 17,000 ticket holders had gotten in without incident. He did not know, and would not know for a long time, that the woman he had sent to the artist entrance had stood in his line for 5 minutes and looked at the crowd and thought something that would stay with her for the rest of her performing life. He had done his job correctly. The door was his responsibility. The ticket was the criterion. She had gone around. But first, for 5 minutes, she had stood where the audience stood, and from that position she had seen something the stage had never shown her and could not show her and would never be able to show her: the specific human weight of the wanting at ground level from inside it. She carried it back around the building and through the artist entrance and onto the stage, and it was in the show. It was in all the shows that followed. It was in the voice, in the specific quality of the giving, in the particular way the voice went where it needed to go and stayed there at full volume, as if it understood each time the specific weight of what was on the other side of the distance. She had stood in the line. For 5 minutes she had been one of them. And from that everything was changed by nothing, and nothing was changed by everything. And the 17,000 people who were in Madison Square Garden on the evening of October 17, 1969 went home carrying whatever the show had given them, not knowing that for 5 minutes before it began, the person who gave it to them had been standing in line beside them, looking at their faces, thinking they came. They always came, and she always went back out to meet them. That was the whole of it. That was all of it. That was enough.